Today's devotion comes again from Max Lucado's book, You'll Get Through This. And today I'd like us to center in on the 41st chapter of Genesis. Just want to remind you the story that takes place before this. The one we know as Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. Then he was, as a slave, he was in Potiphar's house, wrongly accused and thrown in jail for something that he had not done. Then from jail, they found out that he could interpret dreams. He interpreted the dreams of the Pharaoh, and then we find him in the work of Pharaoh's court. So in chapter 41, chapter 41 of Genesis, we read this. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service for the Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. The land produced plentiful. Joseph collected all the food produced in these 7 years in abundance in Egypt and stored them in the cities. In each city he put food grown in its fields that surrounded it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. We're going to skip down to verse 53. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph said. There was famine in all the other lands, but the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, and Pharaoh told the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." And when the famine had spread over the country, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians for their families. And the famine was severe throughout Egypt, and all the countries came to Egypt for grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all of the world. This story you remember had heard before, and it has a message, I believe, for us today. I want to share a little bit from Max Lucado's book, and I believe it has application for us in this day as well. In Max's book, he tells about in the days before the World War II, the days leading up to the war, the British government commissioned a series of posters. The idea was to capture and encouragement to the people in their country, and the posters were very distinct. Their graphics they used and the color that they used was distinct. The only graphic that was on it was the crown of the king, of King George VI. The first poster was put out in September of 1939. In bold capital letters, it said, "Your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory." Soon after that, the second poster was produced. Again, it was all capital letters, bold print. The only graphic was the graphic of the crown of the king. It said, "Freedom is in peril. Defend it with all your might." These posters appeared on the British countryside, on the railroad platforms, in pubs, stores, restaurants. They were everywhere. The third poster was created, but it was never distributed. More than 2.5 million copies were printed, but they were never seen until about 60 years later, when a bookstore owner in northeast England discovered one in a box of old books that he had purchased at an auction. It read, again, same bold print, capital letters, a single line each word: "Keep calm and carry on." Keep calm and carry on. But this poster was never released to the public. The bookstore owner framed it, hung it on the wall, and it became so popular that the bookstore owner began to produce identical images of this original design, putting them on coffee mugs, postcards, and posters. Everyone seemed to like these words of advice. If anyone in history understood this, it would probably be our hero, Joseph. Um, Joseph was one of the most likely to have ever hung this on his office wall. Um, Day after day, month after month, year after year, he kept a cool head and carried on. Whether he was a servant in Potiphar's house, a person running things inside the prison, or appointed to be the right hand person of Pharaoh, he knew what it was to keep calm and carry on. For 7 good years, he stored up the grain so that when the difficult times came, there was food for the people to eat. Um, keep calm and carry on. I believe that we need to do the same. Um, there's things we can't do. I mean, we can't control the weather. We are not in charge of the economy. We by ourselves cannot cure the pandemic. We can't unwreck our cars when we have an accident. But I believe we can map out a strategy for our life, remembering that God is with us in our times of crisis. Um, and we can pray that God will give us steps to deal with each day, small, simple steps. What can we do? We can ask a friend to pray with us. We can look for resources. We can we can make a plan. Um, it who succeeds in the times of difficulty? It isn't always the most flashy. It isn't always the most flamboyant. It isn't. Um, it's the person who has a plan, the person who has a steady hand, the person who has a sober mind and thinks things through. I read a story from Max's book called talking about Roland uh, Amundsen. In 1911, he was the Norwegian who headed a team racing to the South Pole. Robert Scott also was in charge of a team from England. The two expeditions faced identical challenges, identical terrain. They had the same freezing temperatures, the same unforgiving environment. They had equal access to technology and equipment of their day. But Emerson and his team reached the South Pole 34 days ahead of Scott's team. Well, what made the difference? Well, it was planning. Emerson was a tireless strategist. He had a clear strategy of traveling 15 to 20 miles a day. Good weather, 15 to 20 miles. Bad weather, 15 to 20 miles. Um, no more or no less. Uh, 15 to 20 miles. Scott, by the contrast, was irregular. He pushed his team to exhaustion on the good days, but he stopped in the bad. The two men had two different philosophies, and consequently two different outcomes. Amundsen won the race without losing a man, but Scott lost not only the race, but also his life and the lives of all of his members, all for the lack of good planning. Now, you might be saying, well, Pastor, how do you plan for some things? It's really hard. Yes, it is. We need to pray for God's help to help us in our planning. You'd say, I'd rather prefer a miracle. God is able. God can multiply bread. God can calm the stormy seas. Um, and He may do this. He may do these miraculous things. But then again, He may tell you and He may tell me, I'm with you. And I can use you even in this to do good. Now let's make a plan. Trust Him to help you. God's God's great ability His all powerfulness, his sovereignty doesn't take away from our responsibility to plan, our need to do what we can do. Just in fact, it's just the opposite. It should empower us. When we trust in God, we can think more clearly and react more decisively. In the Old Testament book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah said, "We pray to our God and post guards day and night to meet this threat." Nehemiah 4:9. Did you hear that? They they prayed, but they posted guards day and night. They prayed and they posted. They trusted and they act. Trust God to do what trust God, but do what you can do. Obey God, but do what you can do. Don't let our present crisis paralyze you. Don't let the sadness overwhelm you. Don't let the fear intimidate you. To do nothing is the wrong thing. To do something is the right thing. Believe believe in God and just keep calm. Carry on. God bless you.